When my grandmother passed away, the family house became mine. It wasn't a surprise. She had raised me after my parents died, and I was her only living relative. The house itself was old, one of those grand Victorian homes on the outskirts of a small town, the kind of place that had history. I hadn't lived there in over a decade, but I returned for the funeral and stayed to settle the estate. The house smelled the same as I remembered: old wood, dust, and something faintly floral, like the perfume my grandmother used to wear. Everything inside had been kept exactly as it was, as if she had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. But something was wrong. It started with the clocks. All of them had stopped. Every single one. The grandfather clock in the hall, the antique mantel clock in the living room, even my grandmother's favorite pocket watch sitting on the dresser in her bedroom. All frozen at 3:03 a.m. I chalked it up to coincidence at first. Maybe the power outage the week before had messed with them. I reset the clocks, wound up the ones that needed it, and moved on. But the next morning, I woke up to find them all stopped again. 3:03 a.m. The second thing I noticed was the footsteps. At night, just beyond my door, I would hear them. Slow, deliberate, pacing the hallway. At first, I convinced myself it was the old house settling, the way wood expands in contracts. But the pattern never changed, back and forth, pausing outside my bedroom before retreating toward the stairs. I started locking my door at night. Then came the knocking. It happened at exactly 3:03 a.m. 3 soft taps on my bedroom door. The first time, I lay frozen in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The second night, it happened again. And the third. On the fourth night, I finally opened the door. There was nothing there. Just the dark hallway stretching in both directions, silent as a grave. I should have left. But the house was mine, and part of me felt like leaving would mean abandoning my grandmother all over again. So instead, I started investigating. In the attic, I found a locked trunk buried beneath old sheets and forgotten furniture. The key was still in the lock, rusted but functional. Inside, there were photographs. Black and white images, faded with time. They were all of the house, but different. The furniture was arranged strangely, the wallpaper wasn't the same. And in every single picture, there was a figure. A woman in a dark dress, standing just at the edge of the frame. In some, she was by the staircase. In others, by a window. But her face was always blurred, like the camera had captured something that wasn't entirely there. And then I found the last photo. It was the only one in color. It was of me, standing in the hallway. From last night. I left that night. I don't care if the house is mine. I don't care what the will says. Because when I was locking the front door behind me, I heard it one last time. 3 soft knocks. From the inside. Story 2. There are places in the world where the air feels heavier, where time doesn't move the way it should. Places that people forget or pretend don't exist. I found one of those places, and I should have left the moment I did. It was a road trip. One last adventure before my best friend Luke moved across the country. We planned to drive through back roads, hitting the weirdest, most offbeat stops we could find. Abandoned theme parks, ghost towns, roadside diners stuck in the 1950s, that kind of thing. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, with no service and nothing but endless woods around us, we saw a sign. Welcome to Ashford. Population 3,218. It was a lie. The town was empty. No cars. No people. No sounds. We drove past houses with curtains drawn, past a gas station where the lights were on but no one was inside. The main street had storefronts, a diner, a pharmacy, a barber shop, but not a single person in sight. I don't like this, I muttered. Luke, of course, was fascinated. It's like a ghost town that never shut down, he said, peering out the window. I didn't want to stop, but then we saw her. A woman standing on the sidewalk. She was the only person we had seen since arriving. She wore a faded blue dress, her hair pulled back too tightly, her eyes too wide. She didn't wave, didn't move, just watched as we slowed down. Luke rolled down the window. Hey, miss. You okay? She blinked, once. Then, in a voice too flat, too rehearsed, she said, You shouldn't be here. Luke and I exchanged a look. Then she turned around and walked into a building without another word. We should have left. We didn't. The diner was still fully stocked. Plates sat on tables as if people had just gotten up mid-meal. A coffee pot steamed behind the counter, half full. The radio in the corner crackled static. And then, footsteps. Coming from the back. Someone was here. Luke whispered, We should go. I nodded. We backed toward the door. And then the radio switched stations. A voice, old and warped, whispered through the static. "They're watching you." We ran. Outside, the sun was too low in the sky. It had been mid-afternoon when we arrived, but now it was sunset. The air felt heavier, thicker. We sprinted to the car. Luke fumbled with the keys, cursing under his breath. And then, a door creaked open. The woman in the blue dress stood on the diner's porch. Behind her, shadows moved inside. More people. Too many. They stood motionless, watching. Luke got the car started. As we peeled out of town, I risked one last glance in the mirror. The sign we had passed on the way in was still there. "Welcome to Ashford. Population 3,218. But this time, the number had changed. It said 3,220. We didn't stop driving until the town was miles behind us. And when we finally got service again, Luke tried looking it up. There was no Ashford, Pennsylvania. No record of it. As if it had never existed. As if we were never supposed to leave. Story 3. When I was a kid, my family owned a lake house in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't fancy, just an old wooden cabin at the edge of a dark, still lake. We spent summers there, swimming, fishing, roasting marshmallows by the fire. It was a place of peace. Until the year it wasn't. I was 12 the last summer we went. My parents never told me why we stopped going, but I remember. I remember everything. It started with the dock. One afternoon, while my dad was grilling and my mom was inside, I walked down to the water. The lake stretched out in front of me, smooth as glass. No ripples, no wind. Just stillness. And then I noticed something. Wet footprints. Leading from the water onto the dock. They weren't mine. They were small, like a child's. But there was no one else there. I called out, expecting my sister to jump out and scare me, but the only sound was the quiet lapping of the water. I told myself it was nothing. That maybe they were old prints, still wet from the morning. But that night, I heard the knocking. It was soft, rhythmic. 3 slow knocks on my bedroom window. I thought it was my sister, messing with me. I rolled over, ready to yell at her. But when I looked, my blood went cold. It wasn't her. A girl was standing outside the window. She was pale, dripping wet, her hair plastered to her face. Her dress, if you could call it that, clung to her thin frame, the fabric murky with lake water. She knocked again. I couldn't move. She shouldn't be there. My room was on the 2nd floor. There was no way she could be standing there. Then she smiled. Not a normal smile. Too wide, her lips stretching unnaturally. Water dripped from her mouth as she pressed her hand to the glass. And then, she vanished. The next morning, I told my parents. They exchanged a look, then told me it was just a dream. But that evening, my mom announced we were leaving, packing up early. We never went back. I didn't question it. Until last year. Curiosity got the best of me. I looked up the lake, trying to find any stories about drownings. And I found one. 30 years before we owned the house, a girl had drowned in that lake. She was 12 years old, the same age I had been that summer. The article said she had gone missing from the dock, last seen walking toward the water. They found her body days later, but people said she never really left. They said some nights she comes back, looking for someone to take her place. Story 4. There are things I remember from that night, and there are things I don't want to remember. I was 16 when my friends dared me to spend the night at the abandoned house on Holloway Road. It was a stupid dare, one of those things teenagers do to prove they're not scared. But that house? It was different. It wasn't just old. It was wrong. The story went like this. A family had lived there once. Parents, 2 kids. One night, the mother snapped, killed them all, then herself. No one knew why. The house sat empty for years, but people swore they saw lights flickering inside at night. Some claimed they heard whispers from the broken windows. No one stayed long. But I wasn't afraid. Not then. I should have been. I brought a flashlight, a sleeping bag, my phone. No service, of course. The house was worse than I expected. The floor sagged under my weight, and the air smelled wrong, stale, like something old and forgotten. I picked a room on the 2nd floor. The wallpaper was peeling, and the closet door hung open slightly. I made sure to shut it before lying down. For a while, nothing happened. Then, sometime after midnight, the closet door creaked open. I sat up, my pulse hammering. The room was dark, but the sliver of moonlight from the window let me see just enough. The door hadn't swung open all the way, just enough to show the deep blackness inside. I grabbed my flashlight, shined it at the closet. Nothing, just an empty space. I told myself it had been the wind, or the house shifting, but when I turned off the flashlight, I saw it. A hand, thin, pale, resting just on the edge of the door. I couldn't breathe. Then, the fingers curled, and the hand slid back into the darkness. I ran. I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't breathe until I was outside under the stars. The house was silent, dark, but as I turned to leave, I glanced up at the second floor, and in the window, something was standing there, watching me, smiling. I never went back, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear it. A soft creak, like a closet door slowly opening. Story 5. I never should have taken the shortcut. It was late, past midnight, and I was driving home from my brother's place. The highway was empty, the streetlights spaced too far apart, leaving long stretches of darkness between them. I'd been on the road for hours, exhausted, my eyelids growing heavier with every mile. I kept telling myself I should stop at the next gas station, grab a coffee, maybe stretch my legs. Then my GPS glitched. Recalculating. The screen flickered, then displayed a new route. A shortcut. It would shave 40 minutes off my drive, cutting through back roads instead of looping around through the highway. I hesitated. The roads out here weren't always safe. Narrow, poorly maintained, surrounded by dense woods. But I was exhausted, and the thought of getting home sooner made my decision for me. I took the turn. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed on the main road. But I didn't. At first, it was just a road like any other. Narrower, darker. The asphalt had cracks running through it, weeds pushing up through the broken surface. The trees on either side pressed in close, their branches forming a twisted canopy overhead. It was quiet. Too quiet. No streetlights. No houses. Just the endless stretch of road and the suffocating darkness. Then I noticed the signs. Handwritten. Old. Faded. The first one was nailed to a crooked wooden post. Turn back. A joke. It had to be. Probably some local kids trying to scare people. Then another. Not safe after dark. My hands tightened on the wheel. A pit formed in my stomach, but I kept driving. Then the third sign, half buried in the weeds at the edge of the road. Don't look at them. That was when my headlights flickered. For a split second, the road went black. And in that brief moment of darkness, I saw them. Figures. Standing just beyond the trees. Tall. Still. Watching. The lights came back on, and they were gone. I felt something cold trickle down my spine. My stomach twisted. I pressed the gas pedal harder. The road stretched on, endless and empty, the trees closing in tighter. A mile passed, then another, and then a sound, a soft, wet whisper, coming from the back seat. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers tightened on the wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't look. I didn't move. The car felt wrong. The air heavier, thicker. I could hear breathing. Slow, shallow. Then, a breath against my neck. Cold. Wrong. I still didn't turn around. I just drove. Faster. Faster. The road blurred. My vision tunneled. The whispering grew louder, shifting into words, but not in any language I understood. A voice just behind my ear, speaking in a slow, rhythmic chant. I wanted to scream. Then, the headlights cut out. I was blind. The whispering stopped. Something touched my shoulder. A whisper, right next to my ear. You took the wrong road. I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I knew, I was parked in my driveway. The engine still running. My hands still gripping the wheel. I gasped, my breath coming in ragged bursts, my body drenched in sweat. My phone was on the passenger seat, the screen glowing. The GPS was still open. The route was still on the screen. I stared at it, my hands trembling. The road I had taken, the shortcut, didn't exist. I searched for it later. No results. No map records. It was never there. But sometimes, when I drive alone at night, I see the figures in the trees, waiting, and I hear a whisper. You took the wrong road.